Long before cities rose and empires spread, humanity lived in scattered tribes hidden in jungles, deserts, and mountains. To modern ears, their stories sound like nightmares, rituals of blood, feasts of flesh, and whispered chants beneath the glow of firelight. Yet for these tribes, cannibalism was not madness. It was meaning. The origins of a dark practice. Anthropologists believe that cannibalism emerged not only from hunger, but from belief. In many early societies, eating the flesh of another human was not an act of savagery, it was an act of power. To consume an enemy was to steal his courage. To eat the heart of a rival was to inherit his strength. Flesh became more than food. It was a bridge between the living and the spiritual world. Some tribes whispered that the soul lingered in the body even after death. By consuming the body, they ensured the spirit would remain within the tribe forever. Others saw it as revenge. The ultimate way to dominate a rival was to make him disappear, body and soul, into the stomach of the victor. Echoes in the shadows of history. We hear fragments of these rituals from explorers' journals, missionary reports, and bones unearthed in caves. In the Andes, skeletons bear marks of butchery, skulls cracked open for brains, bones scraped clean for marrow. In the jungles of Papua New Guinea, legends speak of long pig, the chilling name for human flesh served in feasts. Even Europe, cloaked in its own sense of civilization, was not untouched. In times of famine, starving peasants turned to one another. But more disturbingly, in medieval medicine, powdered human bones and ground mummy flesh were sold as cures. In this way, even the refined halls of Europe practiced their own form of ritual cannibalism. Stories by the fire. Imagine standing on the edge of a tribal village centuries ago. The night sky is thick with smoke from a roaring fire. Around it, men chant, painted in ash and blood. A prisoner lies bound, his eyes wide as he sees the warriors sharpen knives of stone. The air trembles with the rhythm of drums. For the tribe, this is not horror. It is ceremony. The gods demand sacrifice. The ancestors demand strength. Tomorrow, they believe, their tribe will be stronger, their spirits protected. What we call monstrous, they called sacred. The forbidden curiosity. Why does the idea of cannibal rituals disturb us so deeply, yet fascinate us so completely? Perhaps because it challenges the border between human and beast. To eat flesh is animal. To eat human flesh is something worse, something that forces us to face the darkest corners of our nature. But these forgotten tribes did not see themselves as monsters. They saw themselves as survivors, believers, keepers of tradition. For them, the ritual was a bond with the unseen world. And so, across continents and centuries, whispers of cannibal tribes echo through history. They are stories we try to bury but cannot forget. For in those whispers lies a truth about humanity itself, that beneath our polished civilization, the hunger of the past still waits. If Part 1 revealed the whispers of forgotten tribes, then Part 2 brings us into the heart of their rituals, the blood-soaked ceremonies where flesh became more than sustenance. To these ancient people, cannibalism was not random violence. It was theater, sacrifice, and spiritual technology. Flesh as power. Among warrior tribes across the globe, the act of eating an enemy was never simple hunger. It was a ritual act designed to transfer power. Warriors believed that courage, wisdom, and even supernatural protection could be stolen by consuming the right part of the body. The heart carried bravery. The liver contained vitality. The brain gave knowledge and cunning. Even the hands and feet were eaten in hopes of absorbing skill and swiftness. When a warrior fell, his conqueror would consume him to ensure that death was not the end of his strength, but its rebirth inside the victor. Rituals in the Americas. In the vast expanse of the Americas, cannibal rituals were often intertwined with religion. The Aztecs, infamous for their sacrifices, sometimes roasted and ate the flesh of victims offered to their gods. This was not gluttony, but cosmic duty. They believed that the sun required nourishment from human blood and flesh to rise each morning. To eat the victim was to participate in the survival of the universe itself. In the Amazon basin, certain tribes practiced endocannibalism, the ritual of consuming members of their own tribe after death. This was not cruelty, but reverence. To eat the body was to keep the loved one's spirit alive within the community. Ashes of burned bones were sometimes mixed into drinks, swallowed so that the dead would never truly depart. The blood oath of warriors. In parts of Papua New Guinea, warriors swore oaths sealed not with ink or words, but with blood. After killing an enemy, they roasted his flesh, dividing it among the clan. Each warrior took a piece, swearing to fight on with the strength of the fallen. The ritual was not only about consuming power, but about forging unbreakable unity. Missionaries who later witnessed these rituals were horrified, yet they could not deny the discipline and loyalty of such tribes. To them, cannibalism was a curse. To the tribes, it was a sacred contract, the dance of fire and shadow. Picture it, a night lit by torches. Warriors, their bodies streaked with ash and red paint, move in a circle. In the center, a body lies bound or already lifeless, prepared for the sacred feast. The drums thunder. The air fills with chants, some joyous, some mournful. A shaman raises a blade, cuts into flesh, and lifts a piece high toward the sky. The tribe cheers, believing the gods themselves are watching. When the first bite is taken, silence falls. What follows is not frenzy but order, each member receiving their share, each mouthful swallowed with reverence. To us, it is horror. To them, it was civilization itself. Beyond hunger. It is important to understand, these rituals were rarely about starvation. They were about symbolism. Hunger may drive an animal to eat flesh, but ritual cannibalism was driven by ideas, faith, revenge, immortality. It was a way to shape reality, to bend death into life, to make the unseen world tangible. And so, for these forgotten tribes, flesh was never just meat. Flesh was memory. Flesh was spirit. Flesh was power. Deep within the green labyrinth of the Amazon rainforest, tribes lived in a world where the living and the dead were never truly separate. Their rivers shimmered like mirrors, their trees whispered with voices of spirits, and every creature carried a secret soul. In this realm, the line between flesh and spirit blurred, giving rise to one of the most haunting rituals humanity has ever known. Endocannibalism. Death. Without departure. For many Amazonian tribes, death was not seen as an ending, but as a dangerous transition. The spirit of the dead hovered near, restless, longing to remain with its people. To allow the body to rot in the ground was to insult the spirit. Instead, the tribe chose to consume the body, ensuring that the soul of the deceased would be preserved within them. In some tribes, the bones were burned to ash, mixed with plantains or banana soup, and drunk as a sacred beverage. In others, the flesh was roasted lightly, shared among the family, and eaten in solemn silence. Each mouthful was more than food. It was memory made physical. To swallow the dead was to keep them alive. The ritual atmosphere. Imagine the scene, the rainforest at dusk, alive with the cries of unseen birds. A hut filled with mourners, painted with soot and red dye. In the center, the body of the deceased lies prepared, surrounded by herbs and sacred smoke. A shaman begins to chant, calling the spirit forth, reassuring it that it will not be abandoned. Relatives approach one by one, cutting small pieces of flesh or waiting for the ashes to be stirred into the drink. They do not weep. They do not scream. Instead, they eat in silence, their faces solemn as if taking communion. Each bite is a promise. You will not be forgotten. You remain within us. The meaning behind the feast. Unlike warrior cannibalism, which was about power and domination, Amazonian endocannibalism was about love and remembrance. To eat a child was to never let the child's laughter vanish. To eat a mother was to let her nurture continue through her children. To eat a warrior was to keep his courage burning in the hearts of the living. For them, cannibalism was not grotesque. It was the highest act of loyalty. The cycle of life and spirit. In these tribes, the body was seen as a vessel. Once the spirit departed, the flesh returned to the community in a sacred cycle. The body fed the people carried the spirit guided the people. This cycle ensured that no one was ever truly lost. Death became a transformation, not an absence. Echoes in the jungle. Even today, anthropologists who study these rituals report the strange sense of reverence in tribal songs and stories. Survivors of such feasts describe the taste not with disgust, but with tenderness. It was like tasting the memory of the one we loved. Western missionaries recoiled in horror, labeling these people as savages. But within their world view, it was not savagery, it was sacred duty. The Amazon whispered its secrets through smoke, song, and blood, reminding us that even the most terrifying rituals can be born from love. Far out in the Pacific Ocean lies the rugged island of New Guinea, a land of jagged mountains, misty valleys, and tribes whose traditions stretch back thousands of years. Here, cannibalism took on a new, fearsome dimension, one not of remembrance, but of power. A culture of fear and ferocity. The tribes of Papua New Guinea lived in constant warfare. Villages raided villages, clans struck back with equal fury, and every death demanded vengeance. To kill an enemy was only half the victory. To eat him was to make the victory eternal. Warriors believed that consuming the flesh of their enemies transferred mana, a spiritual energy that carried strength, bravery, and skill in battle. The heart, the liver, and sometimes the brain were prized most, thought to contain the essence of the fallen. To bite into the flesh of an enemy was to strip him of his power and make it your own. The ritual of the feast. Imagine a smoky night after battle. The victors return, their bodies painted with ochre and ashes, carrying trophies of war. Fires roar in the center of the village. Women pound drums, children sing victory chants, and the defeated are laid before the elders. The shaman blesses the feast, calling upon ancestral spirits to witness. The warriors divide the flesh with precision, each cut symbolic. The heart goes to the bravest warrior. The liver is shared among the elders for wisdom. The flesh of the arms is eaten by young warriors to gain strength. The ritual was not just eating, it was ceremony. Every bite was layered with meaning. Terror as a weapon. The psychological effect of these feasts was as important as the spiritual one. Tribes who knew their enemies practiced cannibalism fought with terror in their hearts. To lose in battle was not merely to die, it was to be consumed body and soul, leaving nothing behind. This fear created a cycle of brutality. Raids grew bloodier, feasts more elaborate, until entire tribes were defined by the reputation of their cannibal feasts. Outsiders arrive. When European missionaries and explorers first encountered these tribes, they were horrified. Tales of man-eaters spread across the world, branding Papua New Guinea as a land of savagery. But within the tribes, these rituals were not cruelty for cruelty's sake. They were cosmic transactions, the passing of strength, the binding of communities, the affirmation of warrior culture. The decline of the banquet. By the mid-20th century, cannibalism in Papua New Guinea had begun to decline under colonial influence. Missionaries forbade it, governments outlawed it, and modernity crept into the valleys. Yet in remote corners, whispers persisted of secret feasts, carried out in the shadows. For the tribes, the end of the banquet was not just the end of cannibalism. It was the end of an entire worldview where war, power, and spirit were bound together by flesh, a dark legacy. Today, the warrior's banquet remains etched into the cultural memory of Papua New Guinea. Elders recall it with pride or shame, depending on the ear that listens. Anthropologists record the stories with awe, recognizing that behind the horror lay a profound truth. Cannibalism was never about hunger. It was about identity, survival, and power. And so, in the highlands of New Guinea, the echoes of ancient drums and the taste of forbidden flesh remain part of the island's most haunting legacy. In the Valley of Mexico, where great stone pyramids rose against the sky, the Aztec Empire flourished in dazzling splendor. Their capital, Tenochtitlan, gleamed like a jewel on the lake, a city of canals, floating gardens, and temples that pierced the heavens. Yet beneath this magnificence, a darker truth pulsed. The Aztecs believed the universe itself ran on human flesh and blood. The Aztec worldview. For the Aztecs, life was fragile and precarious. They believed the sun could die if it was not nourished. Without sacrifice, darkness would devour the world. The gods themselves had given their own flesh to create humanity, and so humans owed a debt of flesh in return. Cannibalism was not an everyday practice. It was sacred, ritualistic, and deeply tied to human sacrifice. When captives were offered on the temple steps, their bodies did not go to waste. Instead, they became part of a cosmic exchange, food for gods and food for men. The ritual of sacrifice. Picture the great temple of Tenochtitlan, twin pyramids soaring above the city. Thousands gather below, drums thundering, conch shells wailing. At the top, priests in jaguar skins hold a captive warrior. His chest is painted with chalk, his body trembling under the weight of fate. With obsidian blades sharper than steel, the priests cut open his chest and lift his still beating heart to the sky. Blood pours down the temple steps. The heart is burned for the gods. The body, however, is carried away, destined for another ritual, the feast of the flesh. After sacrifice, the flesh of the captive was cooked with maize, chilies, and herbs, transformed into sacred stew known as tlacatlaoli. This was not food for hunger. Only nobles, priests, and warriors who had captured the victim were allowed to partake. Each bite was consumed with reverence, symbolizing communion with the gods and the warrior's victory. The act was believed to transfer divine energy. To eat the flesh of the sacrificed was to ingest the sun's strength, the god's blessing, the warrior's honor. Cannibalism as cosmic duty. Unlike other tribes where cannibalism meant vengeance or remembrance, for the Aztecs it was a duty to the cosmos. The gods gave flesh to create humans. Humans gave flesh to feed the gods. In return, the sun rose, the rains fell, and life continued. Without this cycle, they believed the world would collapse into chaos. The outsider's horror. When Spanish conquistadors witnessed these ceremonies in the early 16th century, they recoiled in terror. Hernán Cortés and his men wrote of temples soaked in blood, piles of human bones, and banquets where flesh was served in golden bowls. To Europeans, the Aztecs were monstrous cannibals. To the Aztecs themselves, they were simply fulfilling sacred obligations that had kept the universe alive for ages. The end of the ritual. With the fall of Tenochtitlan in 1521, the Spanish set out to erase these practices. Temples were torn down, priests executed, rituals forbidden. Yet in the ruins, the memory of cannibal feasts lingered, whispered in myths, painted in codices, carved into the very stones. The legacy of blood. Today, the story of Aztec cannibalism remains one of the most chilling and misunderstood chapters of history. Was it savagery, or was it faith? Was it cruelty, or was it devotion to forces greater than themselves? To the Aztecs, each sacrifice, each bite of flesh, was not horror. It was hope. Hope that the sun would rise tomorrow. Hope that the gods would smile upon their people. Hope that life itself would not come to an end. And so, the blood of thousands flowed down the temple steps, feeding both gods and men, binding them in a contract written in flesh. Far across the Pacific Ocean, scattered like jewels upon the endless sea, lie the islands of Melanesia, Papua New Guinea, the Solomon Islands, Vanuatu, Fiji. Lush jungles, volcanic peaks, and turquoise lagoons shaped not just the land, but the beliefs of the people who lived there for millennia. Among these beliefs was one of the most unsettling. The dead were not gone. Their spirits lingered, demanding attention, demanding offerings, and sometimes demanding flesh. The world of the living and the dead. For the Melanesian tribes, there was no sharp line between the living and the dead. Ancestors walked among the people as unseen guardians. But if they were not honored, if rituals were neglected, the dead could turn restless, bringing sickness, misfortune, even death. Cannibalism became entwined with this worldview. Flesh was not merely meat, it was a vessel of power, and consuming it meant forging a connection between body and spirit, between the living and the dead. The ritual of the ghost feast. When a powerful chief or warrior died, his death did not end his influence. Instead, a feast was prepared in his honor. His body was ritually dismembered. Certain parts were roasted or boiled with taro and yams. Relatives and tribesmen gathered, not in horror, but in solemn celebration. To eat the flesh of the dead was to take his strength into themselves. His courage, wisdom, and mana, the life force, would live on within the tribe. These ceremonies were called ghost feasts. The meaning behind the flesh. Each bite carried layers of meaning. Spiritual communion, the living shared in the essence of the departed. Social unity, the feast bound the tribe together, ensuring no spirit was left wandering in bitterness. Continuity of power. The strength of a leader passed directly into his people. Unlike the Aztec rituals that looked upward to gods, Melanesian cannibalism looked inward, to ancestors, to family, to the immediate community, the frightening other side. But not all ghost feasts were noble. There were darker stories of revenge cannibalism, where enemies killed in battle were cooked and eaten not to honor them, but to strip them of their mana and condemn their spirits. Eating an enemy was the ultimate insult, a way to erase him from both the living and the afterlife. Travelers and missionaries of the 19th century told chilling tales of warriors returning from battle, carrying human limbs alongside spears and shields, preparing ghost feasts that mingled celebration with vengeance. The missionaries' shock. When Europeans arrived, they were horrified. Missionaries called these practices devil feasts and fought to eradicate them. They built churches, burned sacred relics, and punished tribes that continued. Yet whispers persisted. In remote villages, ghost feasts still took place in secret, well into the 20th century. Even now, in the most isolated valleys, some claim the old ways have not entirely vanished. The living legacy. Today, anthropologists studying Melanesian culture note that while cannibalism is gone, the belief in ancestor spirits remains strong. Offerings of food, song, and ritual are still given to the dead, echoes of ghost feasts, transformed into symbolic forms. The memory of consuming flesh has faded into taboo, but the idea behind it, that the dead live on inside the living, still survives. A feast of shadows. In the jungles of Melanesia, when the drums beat and torches flickered in the night, ghost feasts blurred the line between reverence and fear, between love and hunger. To outsiders it was savagery. To the islanders it was communion with the ancestors, a way to keep the tribe whole, to ensure no spirit ever walked alone. The ghosts were fed, the living were strengthened. And the cycle of flesh and spirit endured. In the heart of the South Pacific lies Fiji, a chain of lush islands with turquoise waters and volcanic peaks. Today, Fiji is known for its paradise beaches and welcoming culture. But centuries ago, it was feared across the ocean for something far darker. Its rulers were called the Cannibal Kings. The islands of fire and flesh. For centuries, Fiji stood at the crossroads of trade and warfare among Pacific peoples. Chiefs ruled like gods, their word law, their power absolute. And power, in Fiji, was not just shown by wealth or warriors, it was shown by flesh. The more enemies a king consumed, the greater his mana, his sacred force, was believed to be. Eating human flesh was not gluttony. It was political theater, religious ritual, and proof of dominance. The ritual of the oven. Captured enemies were brought before the chiefs. Some were warriors taken in battle. Others were messengers who had delivered insults. Still others were unfortunate victims of tribute. They were killed in ceremonies, then prepared in earth ovens called lovo, the same ovens used for everyday feasts of pork and yam. Flesh was seasoned, roasted, and served to the chief and his closest allies. The act was both terrifying and symbolic. To eat the flesh of one's enemy was to humiliate him completely. His body devoured, his spirit broken, his power stolen. The king of cannibals, Ratu Udre Udre. Among all the Fijian rulers, none became as infamous as Ratu Udre Udre, who lived in the 19th century. According to legend, he ate 872 human bodies over his lifetime. For each victim, he placed a stone in a pile that still stands in Fiji today. Some say he believed that when the pile reached 1,000 stones, he would become immortal. Missionaries who visited Fiji during his reign wrote of ceremonies where dozens of men were slaughtered and roasted at once, their flesh shared among the chief's court, while villagers watched in awe and fear. Cannibal forks, eating with the sacred tool. A chilling artifact from Fiji's past is the cannibal fork, a carved wooden tool with long prongs. Chiefs were considered too sacred to touch human flesh with their own hands. Instead, attendants would feed them morsels using these forks. Today, these forks are displayed in museums, haunting reminders of rituals that once bound power, religion, and fear together. The coming of the missionaries. By the mid-19th century, European missionaries and colonizers arrived. They were horrified by what they saw. Some wrote that Fijian chiefs feasted on man as though he were pork. The missionaries waged a spiritual war, spreading Christianity and condemning cannibalism as sin. Chiefs who converted abandoned the practice, while others resisted. Over decades, cannibalism slowly faded as colonial rule and Christianity reshaped Fijian society. The legacy of the cannibal kings today, Fiji embraces its reputation carefully. Cannibalism is long gone, but the memory lingers in oral traditions, in museum artifacts, and in the tourist stories whispered around campfires. The cannibal kings have become part of Fiji's mythic identity, half horror, half heritage. For the people of Fiji, it is not a shameful past, but a complex one. A reminder that their ancestors lived by a different code, where flesh was power, and a king's hunger was as vast as the ocean itself. Shadows over paradise. When travelers now stroll the beaches of Fiji, it is hard to imagine the fires of the lovo ovens glowing with human flesh, the chants rising into the night, the chiefs sitting proudly as they tasted the ultimate symbol of dominion. But the earth remembers. The stones of Ratu Udre Udre's pile remain. The cannibal forks rest behind glass. And the legends of the cannibal king still ripple through the islands, whispered like waves across the shore. High in the misty mountains of Papua New Guinea, where jagged peaks cut through the clouds and rivers carve deep valleys, live some of the most isolated tribes on earth. For centuries, their world was closed to outsiders, their beliefs shaped by the raw power of nature, and among their most haunting practices was the ritual of bone-eating. A land of spirits. To the Papuan tribes, life and death were bound tightly together. The spirit of a person did not simply vanish after death. It lingered in the bones, in the marrow, in the very dust of the body. To leave those remains untouched was dangerous. A restless spirit could bring plague, famine, or madness. To consume them, however, meant reclaiming the soul into the tribe. The ritual of bone consumption. Unlike some tribes who focused on flesh, the Papuans looked deeper, into the bones themselves. The body of the deceased, especially if it was a loved one, would be carefully roasted. Flesh might be eaten, but the true power lay in the bones and marrow. Bones were cracked open with stone tools. The marrow sucked out, sometimes mixed into sago porridge. In some villages, powdered bones were ground into ash and stirred into water, drunk during morning rituals. This was not cannibalism for hunger. It was endo-cannibalism, eating one's own dead, not enemies, an act of grief, love, and spiritual duty. The meaning of the bones for the Papuans. Bones carried the essence of life. Strength, By eating marrow, they believed the deceased's vigor lived on in the tribe. Unity. Families who ate together shared a bond that could never be broken, even by death. Spiritual protection. The spirit of the dead would not wander, but remain close, anchored in those who consumed the bones. It was a way of saying, "You are gone, but you remain within us. You will never leave." The fear of sorcery. Not all bone rituals were sacred. Some tribes believed bones could be stolen by sorcerers, ground into powder, and used to curse enemies. To prevent this, families sometimes consumed the bones quickly, ensuring no part of their loved one could be used against them. The fear of bone sorcery was so strong that entire villages might perform bone-eating rites, not only out of love, but out of terror. The encounter with outsiders. When missionaries and anthropologists first ventured into Papua's highlands in the 20th century, they encountered stories of bone feasts that shocked the world. Some described villages where families sat in silence, passing bowls of marrow, tears streaming down their faces as they ate. To outsiders, it was horror. To the Papuans, it was mourning, as natural as a funeral prayer. The disappearance of the rituals. By the mid-1900s, most bone-eating rituals had faded under pressure from colonial governments and Christian missionaries. Yet whispers remained. Even in recent decades, remote valleys have yielded tales of bone ash being consumed in secret, hidden from modern eyes. The legacy of the bone eaters. Today, the bone rituals of Papua are remembered not as savagery, but as an expression of love and fear. They were acts of grief so profound that eating the bones of the dead felt like the only way to endure loss. In the mountains where clouds hang low and spirits are said to walk among the living, the bone eaters whispered a truth few outsiders could understand. Death does not end belonging. Shadows in the mountains. Imagine the flicker of firelight in a Papuan hut, the crack of bone against stone, the soft murmur of mourning songs. A family gathers not to feast, but to bind themselves forever to the one they lost. The bones are consumed. The spirit is safe. The dead are home. Deep in the green labyrinth of the Amazon rainforest, where sunlight barely touches the forest floor and rivers twist like serpents, live tribes whose beliefs are older than history itself. To them, the jungle is alive with spirits. Every tree, every river, every creature carries a soul. And among these tribes, there are whispers of a darker tradition. Sorcerers who practiced cannibalism to steal power. The world of spirits and shamans. In the Amazon, the boundary between the human and the spirit world is thin. Shamans act as mediators, traveling into trances guided by visions of jaguars and serpents to speak with the unseen. But not all shamans were healers. Some were feared as sorcerers, masters of dark power who used flesh and blood as keys to the spiritual realm. The ritual of flesh and power. When an enemy was captured, or when a rival shaman was killed, certain tribes believed their power could be stolen. Flesh was roasted in secret fires, hidden from the larger tribe. Sorcerers consumed the heart or brain, believing these parts held the victim's soul force. Sometimes flesh was dried, powdered, and mixed into drink, so that the power of the victim would slowly seep into the sorcerer's body. It was not food. It was alchemy of the soul. The jaguar sorcerers. Among the most feared were the jaguar sorcerers, shamans who claimed to transform into jaguars in spirit form. By eating human flesh, they said they were binding themselves to the jaguar, the most powerful predator of the Amazon. Villagers whispered of men who prowled the night with glowing eyes, their hunger never sated, their power fed by the spirits of those they devoured. Fear in the villages. Unlike ritual cannibalism that bound communities together, sorcery cannibalism tore communities apart. Villages lived in fear that their neighbors might secretly be flesh-eaters, using the death of others to grow stronger. When unexplained deaths or sickness struck, sorcerers were often blamed. Sometimes they were hunted, executed, and, in a grim twist, their own flesh was consumed to neutralize their power. The encounter with outsiders. When European explorers pushed into the Amazon in the 16th and 17th centuries, they carried back chilling stories. Chroniclers wrote of tribes where shamans drank the blood of captives and ate their hearts to speak with demons. Missionaries condemned these practices as satanic, while colonists used them as justification to enslave or destroy entire villages. But to the tribes themselves, cannibal sorcery was less about cruelty and more about survival in a world where the spirit realm was as real as the physical one. The disappearance and survival. By the 20th century, many of these practices had retreated into secrecy. Anthropologists occasionally heard whispers of rituals hidden deep in the forest, bones ground into powder, flesh burned in secret fires, but few saw them directly. Even today, some Amazonian shamans speak of the old ways, of powers too dangerous to be used openly, of spirits that demand more than song or smoke. The legacy of cannibal sorcery. To the outside world, these rituals are horror stories. But within the tribes, they are remembered as forbidden knowledge, a reminder of the thin line between healer and destroyer, between shaman and sorcerer. The cannibal sorcerers believed that to consume flesh was to command spirits, to bend the jungle itself to their will. And though their rituals have mostly vanished, the fear they inspired still lingers in the whispers of the Amazon. The jungle remembers. Imagine the Amazon at night, the endless chorus of insects, the roar of a distant jaguar, the flicker of fire in a hidden clearing. A shaman chants, his hands stained with blood, his eyes rolling back as he devours the heart of his victim. Around him, the jungle seems to breathe, alive with spirits answering his call. For him, it is not madness, it is power, it is survival, it is sorcery carved in flesh. When the fires of the past fade and the drums fall silent, only echoes remain. Cannibalism, once ritual, once sacred, once terrifying, now lingers at the edges of memory, in whispers, in stories, in shadows. The transformation of rituals. By the 19th and 20th centuries, most cannibal traditions had either vanished or been forced into secrecy. Colonial rule, missionary pressure, and modern law crushed open practice. But the beliefs that sustained them did not disappear so easily. Some tribes replaced flesh-eating with symbolic foods, animal hearts, painted effigies, or red-colored drinks. Others carried forward only the songs and dances, stripped of their original meaning. In many places, the stories themselves became warnings, morality tales about power, hunger, and the boundaries of humanity. The weight of memory. For those who lived in communities where cannibalism was once practiced, the memory is not one of shame but of survival. To them, these were not monstrous acts, but ways of binding together, of healing, of fighting fear with ritual. The Western world called it savage. The tribes called it life itself. When hunger returns, history shows that cannibalism never disappears completely. In times of famine, war, or collapse, the taboo can be broken again. From the Russian gulags to sieges in Europe, from shipwrecked sailors to stranded explorers, the same desperate logic has reappeared. Flesh as the last source of survival. The tribal rituals remind us of something chilling. What we call monstrous today was, in the past, a choice between death and life. Modern echoes in secret. Anthropologists and explorers whisper that even in the late 20th century, there were hidden cases of cannibalism, deep in Papua New Guinea, in the Amazon, or in isolated villages where old beliefs never fully died. These are not public rituals anymore. They are ghosts of traditions, surviving in secrecy, woven with fear, shame, and mystery, the fear and the fascination. Why do these stories continue to grip us? Why do books, documentaries, and films return again and again to cannibal tribes? Because cannibalism touches the deepest of human fears, the fear of becoming prey, of the human body reduced to meat. And at the same time, it tempts us with forbidden knowledge. The idea that flesh could be more than food, that it could carry memory, power, even immortality. The last witnesses. As the elders of once cannibal tribes pass away, Their testimonies are recorded, sometimes reluctantly, sometimes with pride. They speak of rituals where enemies became part of the tribe, where grief was swallowed, where power was stolen through flesh. And when these voices fall silent, only books, films, and stories like this one remain. The world will never see those fires burn again. But the memory cannot be erased. The legacy of flesh. Cannibalism reminds us that human culture is not one thing. It is 1,000 paths, some light, some dark. It tells us that survival can twist morality, that belief can turn the forbidden into the sacred, that what horrifies one world can define another. And most of all, it forces us to face the uncomfortable truth. We are not so far from the edge ourselves. Hunger, fear, and desperation can strip away civilization faster than we dare to imagine. The echo in the dark, picture the last night of such a ritual. A fire burning low, chants fading, smoke curling into the trees. The flesh is gone, the bones scattered, the tribe asleep. The jungle is quiet again, the desert silent, the mountains still. But in the dark, the echo remains. A reminder that the line between human and beast, sacred and profane, is thinner than we wish. Cannibalism is not gone. It is simply hidden, in stories, in fears, in the deepest shadows of human memory.